Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, the climate guy setting the record straight about climate. In this video, I discuss fake news about sea level in the Washington Post. A brand new study from an international group of scientists has concluded that the pace of sea level rise has nearly tripled since 1990. The new paper concludes that before 1990, oceans were rising at about 1.1 millimeters per year, or just 0.43 inches per decade. But from 1993 to 2012, they found that it rose at 3.1 millimeters per year, or 1.22 inches per decade. This theory is easy enough to test out because of one of the properties of water. Water seeks a level surface. If there was no waves or wind out on the ocean, the surface of the ocean would be completely smooth like this lake in Colorado, and all the water would be equidistant from the center of the earth. In fact, this water is so smooth you probably can't even tell that the picture is taken upside down. Because of the fact that water seeks a level surface, if there actually was a big acceleration in sea level rise in 1993, we would see it at every single one of the tide gauges around the world. Water doesn't form a big mound at one end of your bathtub, lake, or ocean. It spreads out evenly. So let's look at some of the best long-term tide gauges around the world and see if they show a tripling of sea level after 1993. The tide gauge at Lower Manhattan has records going back to before the Civil War. What this tide gauge shows us is that sea level at Lower Manhattan has been rising at almost exactly the same rate for 160 years. In the 1850s, it was rising 2.84 millimeters per year. In the 1930s, it was rising 2.84 millimeters per year, and it's still rising 2.84 millimeters per year. I've drawn on this graph in the dashed red line the claimed tripling of sea level rise since 1993. As you can see, it diverges sharply from the actual measured trend. We're not only not seeing a tripling in sea level rise in Manhattan, we're actually seeing no increase in the rate at all. In fact, since the year 2010, sea level has actually been falling at Lower Manhattan. So perhaps Lower Manhattan is a fluke. Perhaps we'll see this tripling of sea level rise at some other stations. Let's look at Atlantic City, New Jersey now. Once again, we see exactly the same thing. No change in the rate of sea level rise over the last century, and certainly not a tripling. What about at Boston? Same thing. No change in the rate of rise, and definitely no tripling. How about Baltimore? Same story. And again, we see the same story at Charleston, South Carolina, and Key West, Florida. Not a single long-term tide gauge shows this tripling in sea level rise, which is claimed by the authors of this paper. In fact, none of them show any increase in the rate of sea level rise. But this story gets much worse. We've been looking at stations all up and down the East Coast where the land is sinking. Let's go to the West Coast where the land is stable. Well, in the San Francisco Bay, sea level isn't really rising at all. In fact, it's hardly higher now than it was 80 years ago. And if we go to Stockholm, Sweden, we see that sea level has been falling at the same rate for about 125 years. There's definitely no upwards trend after the year 1993. It's painfully obvious that the claims in this paper are incorrect. So let's look now at what they're doing wrong. Well, here's what they did. Notice 1993, suddenly this black line shows an upwards acceleration. And this is satellite data. What the authors did was they changed methodologies. If you're going to change your methodology and do comparisons versus your prior technology, you have to calibrate the two together. The tide gauges show unequivocally that there's been no acceleration in the rate of sea level rise since 1993, much less a tripling. This junk science is reminiscent of Michael Mann's switching methodologies in 1960 in order to hide the decline in the tree ring data. The bottom line here is that sea level rise hasn't tripled since 1993. In fact, it hasn't even accelerated since 1993. And if we look at the longer term record, we can see that sea level has been rising for 20,000 years and was rising much faster from 16,000 years ago to 8,000 years ago than it is now. The global warming industry distributes $5 billion per year in research money to scientists willing to produce the junk science which they need. Science just doesn't get any worse than this. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science for a long time.